Languages, a leader in language services. I will be moderating this very topical webinar today, 7 Secrets of Effective Resource Management. I see that we have at least 13 attendees on. That's great. If you have more people in your office that are going to be logging on, they will be able to hear everything as they do log in. If you have a question during the presentation, please remember that you are in listen-only mode, but there is a section where you can type your question, and we will be addressing all of those at the end of the webinar. Managing resources well is an ongoing effort. No matter what size company or how fast you are growing, the same essential best practices will help you to stay in control of your financial situation and be the steady hand at the helm. Along the way, don't hesitate to lean on trusted advisors who can help you over that finish line. I am pleased to introduce today's speakers. It's Andrew Galina, CEO of Syrinx Consulting Corporation, and Amrinder Arora, CTO of Bizmerlin. Amrinder, I'm going to address him first, and I know Andrew will be talking about himself. He is responsible for all of the technical direction at Bizmerlin, and he is also a very accomplished professor and a faculty member at George Washington University, and he does speak frequently at conferences. As you can see, there's a little bio for each one of them up there, and their contact information will be available to you at the end of the webinar. Andrew, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
All right, thanks, Cindy. So yeah, as Cindy said, I'm Andrew Galina, CEO of Syrinx Consulting. I've been a programmer since I was 11 years old, and our company is all about building software for other companies by the job or by the hour. And we're on a lot of big projects with other companies, and we've seen time and again that having the wrong mix of people at the wrong times can cost companies money. And in today's world, a lot of companies are using outsourced firms like Syrinx in order to develop software either in conjunction with their team or completely separate from their team in kind of an overflow resource situation. And being able to manage not only your internal resources but also external vendor resources efficiently ends up translating to big cost savings, as Amrinder will get into. So by being able to bring in these specialized skill sets, you're able to get exactly what you need done on time and on budget. But there's always the question of how do you allocate resources, not just for current projects, but also for the ones that you have in your pipeline for the next 3, 6, 9 months and so forth. And as a veteran of hundreds of projects over the years at dozens of companies, I've seen best practices and worst practices along the way. A lot of startups, you see them bringing in resources, in order to do development, kind of putting the cart before the horse without really having anyone to lead them and figure out exactly how things should be prioritized and what order things should be done. We also see the same sort of issue in larger companies where either large internal teams or working with distributed teams, they have difficulty in managing the resources and figuring out how to efficiently use them, kind of avoiding idle time. And also in service companies like mine, managing utilization, making sure that your folks are highly utilized and are frequently on projects and not spending too much time on the bench in between them. So we came across a tool that helps our customers and our company manage resources for optimum success with minimal bottom line impact. And we thought it had a great potential for adding value, so that's why we're partnering with Bizmerlin to do this webinar. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Amrinder to have him talk about Bizmerlin.
Great. Thank you, Andrew, and welcome everyone. I did see that where's my good friend Andrew Galina was speaking. A lot of attendees just signed in, so if you have just logged in, welcome again to the webinar. I think when Cindy was giving an introduction, it was a few people had joined in, and now I think we see a lot more people on. So soon we'll be talking about the 7 secrets of effective resource management. I just want to talk about this in a little bit informally, in the sense that these are the secrets, the best practices as Andrew referred to. These are the best practices that have really been shared with us by most of our customers. So essentially, if you are a customer and you're listening on, Well, thank you to you for sharing this thing, because these are all the best practices that we heard from you over time. So before I just get into the 7 secrets of effective resource management, I just want to quickly mention what is resource management itself, because many people may have a slightly different view of what resource management is. So essentially, resource management overall is a solution, is a system for planning, managing the right resources at the right time. And there are a few different nuances to it. And some of the nuances are also driven by what is your context of this entire setting. So essentially, you may have different kinds of professionals. They may be IT professionals, or they may be technicians. Some of our customers have, they have not IT professionals, but those are technicians who are going to do a certain sort of home services as they go through their work. Sometimes it could be lawyers, it could be something else. So that's part of your context. You have to define what does a resource mean for you, and after that, how does the resource get deployed? Some of our customers use a word called mission or deployment. These are the resources who are going to get deployed at a mission. Or many times a commonly used word, of course, is a project, is the people who are put on a project. So that's all is a part of your context. You can choose your right vocabulary that suits your business setting. But after that, some of the key aspects of resource management are essentially how do you allocate those resources, how do you forecast them so you're not surprised when you need somebody, and how do you manage their performance, how do you manage their skills, and of course, an entirely separate topic is how do you bring them on, which is the hiring automation and onboarding. The 7 secrets that we'll be talking about today, they more refer to the first 3 key aspects, as we find that usually the hiring automation has its own set of challenges and a lot of good practices there, which really merit another webinar in itself. So if you may be entirely bought into why the resource management matters, but many times the usual answer to why resource management goes along the lines of, well, you'll have happier clients and you'll be able to track your resources better and there'll be improved accuracy in forecasting the resources. And that all is absolutely true. There's definitely no doubt about it. But one of the ways that we see that this really matters a whole lot, when people see some numbers hit hard, they find that it really matters a whole lot. And this is what usually people in this industry, they usually refer to it as a 3% is equal to 100% rule. And very simply put, this rule, what the rule says is that a 3% change in your resource utilization, whether for better or for worse, it implies a difference of about 100% in your bottom line, in your total profit. So that's a pretty significant impact. So that means even if you make a slight improvement in your resource utilization, you're going to have a very significant value to it. And that is really why the main reason why we think that the resource management really matters a whole lot. Now, in some organizations, depending upon how they're structured, they may not use resource planning, but for professional service organizations, we find that their entire success is dependent on how well they are able to resource utilization. Andrew referred to it as well. How do you, for example, how do you make sure that people are not waiting for the work to start, and vice versa? So this is one of the key aspects. So we always call it as a 3% is equal to 100% rule. Here's a good example of it. This example came from one of our customers. It's about an 80 people organization in this area. So this, for example, they went from scenario 1 to scenario 3 simply by being able to better utilize their resources, quite nearly doubling their profit. So it's a pretty significant impact if we are able to do this thing right. Now the scenario 2, the hypothetical scenario, is what they could have gone into if, for example, not able to manage their resources better. So your numbers may depend upon what exactly is the size of your organization, but usually we find that this ratio is usually quite common. So I think we all understand that what resource management is and why it matters a whole lot, the 3% is equal to 100% rule. So let's get right into the first trick that we have seen, the first best practice that we have seen. One of the first best practices that we've seen is essentially goes around the topic of resource allocation. So this typically we find when the organizations they go from a certain size. So for example, if they're about 5 to 10 people organization, 15 people organization, they're still able to do a lot of this in their head. on a simple spreadsheet. But at a certain point, then they say we're too large and the impact is just too much. So at that point, they go into a proper solution and have a good resource planning allocation so that they can use a proper software which is then shared with a lot of people within the organization, so they can all make changes to it and at least all view it. Another sub-practice that we see within this thing is that they make this resource project allocation matrix essentially public within the company. So that means anybody can be able to go in and see where, who's deployed where, who's working on which project. Now again, like I said, public, but public within the company, of course. And we find that this usually is, after all, public information anyway, because you could talk to somebody at the water cooler, and even if somebody works in a different project, they could say, hey, I'm working on this project, and oh, it's very busy, or it's crazy busy right now, etc. So you can see who is over allocated, and similarly, you could see somebody and say, well, I'm just waiting for the project to start next week. So they are underutilized at the moment. So making this thing public is a pretty significant step within the company, is a pretty significant step. And this, again, is the first step, the first best practice that we see organizations take once they cross a certain size. One of the things is, of course, is that the exact visualization depends upon each particular customer. Many times this is, for example, is a default vanilla implementation, but many times we find that people are then able to go in and make changes to it. So, essentially change the look and feel of it, and as well as change the visualization of it. Some people prefer it to be the bars along the people or the bars along the project and things like that. But once you have the data, you can really visualize it many different ways. So that's one of the first things. Now, of course, once you have the right data, then a lot of good things come with it, which, for example, is that you can actually do a good resource planning to it. That means you can see how many people you're going to need on a certain project, how many people you're going to need probabilistically on a certain project. So a tool like this typically connects with your other systems in your infrastructure. For example, you could have Salesforce, you could have Jira. So it integrates with them to see, first of all, what's in your pipeline. And based on your Salesforce implementation or other CRM implementation, it will be able to pull, saying when do we need to start thinking about resources for it. Maybe if it's just a lead, maybe not yet, but if the person has already given a verbal, or maybe even before that, you already want to think about, while this project has a 50% probability of starting at a certain point in the next 3 months, maybe we should think about who are the resources who are potentially going to work on it. Similarly, on your project management side, which typically is downstream, once you already have the team, then you can push it out to that particular system so that this project is already there, and these are people who are going to be working on it. So a good resource planning allocation system is going to work with the other things that you have in the ecosystem. And like I said, once you have what you have in the previous, like I mentioned in the previous slide, once you have a resource allocation, you can then use the data many different ways. And one of the main things that it does is that you avoid losing because you don't have billable people. That's one of the main things we see from our customers saying that stops them. So I'll go into the second secret, the second best practice. So this best practice is a little bit less intuitive in the sense that it's not simply taking the allocation, what they have. That's something the core have to do. But this requires them to think about it a little bit more strategically, which is that they need to employ a skill matrix. So we find again that a skill matrix has a pretty significant impact, even though sometimes it may require a little bit of thinking up front to say, what are the kinds of skills we have and what are the skills that we really want to get into. So that requires a little bit of strategic direction. But once that is sort of established, then a skill matrix, a skill management platform is going to help enable your organization to do a lot of things with the relevant skills. So you can define the skills, you can assess the people, and you can train your staff. So the training really sort of goes with the skill management. So you have the skill matrix so that you can find who are the people, what are the trainings that I need to get so I can get the people onto the next level. So again, a skill matrix it'll have many different visualizations to it. Many people even try to find assess the skills with many different ways. And of course, like in any kind of organization, you're going to be able to dissect the skills along different skill types. You say, okay, right now these are the developers that I'm looking at, so I want development skills. But maybe you're looking at project management people, so you need to be looking at project management skills, et cetera, et cetera. So that's all is a part that comes with the skill skill matrix. Now, one of the things that we do a little bit differently is that our approach to skill management is a little bit more crowdsourcing based approach. I'll come to it again in a little bit, but essentially what that means basically is that as people go through using the skill matrix and as they help assess other people, the skill matrix essentially updates itself over time. So that's a pretty key value, that while you may spend a little bit of time initially thinking on what are the skills that you want to assess, but over time you never have to go in and do a one-week retreat to assess people's skills. Rather, you're always, as the system goes on, you're always, as people give each other feedback, the skill matrix continues to evolve itself. So that's a pretty significant value add. Let me jump into the trick number 3 that we find. This trick, again, is a very, very, very simple. And if you're not using this in your organization yet, we highly recommend it. And this essentially, what this is it's a concept called the resource issues. And what that means is a resourcing issue essentially is any issue related to the aspect of resourcing that your customer is thinking about or is mentioning to you, whether formally or informally. And when we say anybody in the organization should be able to add a resource issue, what we mean by that is that you don't necessarily need to be a project manager to create a resource issue. You maybe were not even talking about a resourcing to the customer, but somebody mentioned to you that, hey, the way it's working, I think we probably need to add a QA or two. So that's some very simple thing that they have just mentioned, but this allows you to capture those resource issues. And sometimes they could be simply saying something about somebody's skill that, it would be great if this person really knew that particular technology, or if this person really had that particular skill. So again, you capture it. Sometimes, again, somebody could say, informally saying that we think we may have to finish the project a month earlier rather than later, possibly due to a budget issue or any other issue. So this, again, allows you to capture it so that somebody can take some action on it later on. And again, like I said, you don't need to be a project manager to be able to do that. You should be able to do that really, any which way. And again, there are 2 other tricks that are sort of related. I'll bring them up together. They are that a project manager, this typically is, or the project program manager or whoever is the person making these choices for the project. This is typically what they do is that they try to get from the customer, how many people do we really need, right? So this is sort of is what we call a resourcing requirement or a resource plan. So once they have the resource plan, they enter that into the system, and from the resource plan, then they're able to calculate the gaps, saying that this is what we need. We have, for example, we have 3 people. We need 6 people, so that means we have a gap of 3. So what then the resource management team does is then they're able to see the gaps, the gaps between the resource plan and the actual allocation, as well as the resource issues, from a holistic picture, and then they're able to see what is really the action that we take. Now, again, I use this phrase called the resource management team. If you are in an organization that maybe is about 30 or 40 people, but you may not have a separate department or even team, and that, for example, is a task that could be being done by your VP of services or by the CEO himself. I'm pretty sure that Andrew sometimes gets into these kinds of conversations, and that's entirely fine too. Whoever is the person making the choice can at least then look into all of these issues together, say, okay, what's a resource issue, what have we heard, and secondly, what are our gaps, what actions do we need to take, and when do we need to do that. All of these things that I'm mentioning that you need to do today, these gaps may be today, or these gaps may be 3 months down the road. That maybe today you don't have a gap, but 2 months later, one more person is needed, and one person, by the way, is going on a 3-month leave, so we have a certain gap. So for you to be able to see the past, the present, and the future, that's exactly is where these tricks, where these 2 best practices come into the picture. I know some people, I just happen to notice that some people just logged into the webinar maybe about 5 minutes ago, and we have been going through this thing. So Cindy, I don't know if you just want to quickly mention about the question box. Please go ahead, and then I'll continue on with it. Yep.
Okay. I want to remind everyone that if you have questions, there is a question section on your dashboard. If you would like to submit those, all of the questions will be answered at the end. So if you hear something that perks your interest and you have a question about it, or you need something clarified, please enter it in that section, and we will definitely address it at the end.
Great, thank you, Cindy. So at this point, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right into the next trick, and we know that some people joined a couple of minutes late, so we'll summarize all the tricks again. So if you did miss the first trick, don't worry, we'll just put it all together in one slide so you can all see it. So the next key skill, next key trick that we see, it's one of the best practices we see where a lot of the organizations who use this thing have a lot of impact is that they simply use the goal management system or the performance management system to be able to guide the desired behavior. So whatever is that you want to get from your workforce, you want to set the goals that are really trying to target that. Many times for professional services organizations at least, they usually have a billable allocation goal that's saying that you want to be able to maintain a billable allocation of a certain percentage, for a certain weeks at a time, or for a certain weeks during the year. So that, for example, could be, excuse me, so that, for example, could be an annual goal that you set. But most often we do see that the goals are being established for people at a monthly or at a 3-month level. So we find that typically the goals that are being used that are about 1 month or 3 months away, those work better than pretty much goals that are being set on a daily basis, because then they really look like tasks, right? Or if the goals that are like about a year away, because then they're too long-term goals, and then really that's something that you want to embody into your system. Don't necessarily need to have a goal for that. So that's just the best practice that we have seen. Again, I'm interested in seeing what is that you have seen work better than others, but these are some of this is again is one way that they are able to use the goal system to be able to guide the people to do how they want to approach it. So sometimes we see that a goal is a little bit more soft to say that over time you want to talk to the customer at least 6 times for this thing. So it's a softer goal that it's just encouraging their people that you want to talk to the customer about budget X number of times, or you want to talk to people informally, the parking lot conversation X number of time, etc., etc. So those are the goals. Again, if you set the correct goals, they are able to guide the desired behavior. They have a significant impact. Again, one good thing that we see about goals is that you want to set the goals that are actually track and remember. Don't simply set a goal and forget it. Many times people set a goal and then not worry about it until 3 months later, and then they see, oh, they missed it, right? Or they did it, but they just did it because they did it, not because they had the goal. So you want to have a goal that's track and remember kind of goal. So what the system does is, so pretty much as you create the goal, you want to establish a couple of accountability partners for that, who are collaborators, who will help ensure that the person whose goal is assigned to is going to be able to meet the goal. So that's one of the ways that we find that people who are people who set the goals correctly, then they are able to, that are able to use these sort of goodies that, the collaborators, etc. They are able to typically use the system better, because what the system then does is if the person doesn't make good on their goal for some time, and the system knows that based on the elapsed time they are falling behind, then it will email out to contact the other people saying that, hey, this person may need a little nudge, so do you want to talk to them? So essentially somebody else, an accountability partner, can go talk to them so they can continue to make progress on the goal. So another very related but perhaps in a way slightly different as well, because we do see that some of our customers just use this mechanism entirely. So they simply use the instant feedback mechanism. So this is what we typically call the secret number 7, the 7th secret, what they're trying to do is they're building a culture of positive feedback. So they essentially give, and it's again is sometimes it is it's such a simple mechanism that it can be a little bit misleading that it's so simple. How can it have so much impact? But it actually has one of real profound impacts, because when people get a feedback, they can, I think that probably gets a lot more into the psychology, but this really changes the employee satisfaction, the person satisfaction, and their engagement with what you're trying to do. So with this mechanism, you can reinforce the company values. Again, this is a part which is highly configurable in the sense that people change this quite a bit. Pretty much every customer's performance feedback mechanism looks a little bit different, because they change these screens and they change a little bit on what is it that you want to say to somebody besides just a narrative, right? So do you want to attach skills to it? And this goes back to the point that I was mentioning around the crowdsourcing of skills. So when you give a performance feedback, people are then able to say, okay, this was a skill relevant to which I was giving the performance feedback. So not only you have given somebody a good performance feedback, for example, if somebody did some real good work on project management side, you've also helped reinforce their skill assessment in skill matrix. So it goes with it. And many times we see that our customers, what they're doing is they attach some goodies to the performance feedback, even though it's not necessary that you try to give it, that the award should be anything other than the recognition itself. But many times, depending on what they see working best for their workforce, they will attach that here's a $25 Amazon gift card, just out of, that's entirely out of blue. That's nothing to do with their appraisal or anything else. It's just because from one small thing, somebody felt that they really wanted to, recognize this person. And of course, once they recognize this person, another one of the cool things that they do is they also, put it on somebody's wall. So essentially, the wall is that person's homepage in Bizmerlin, where they can see what all the good things that they have done, and any other information about them, the contact information, anything else that you have configured to be made public. Again, this particular secret we find is something that's very simple with a lot of impact. So at this point, I've gone through the 7 best practices that I was going to. I did notice that some people joined a little later. So here, all the 7 tips and tricks all together. If you did miss first or second in the beginning, please take a look at all of them. And essentially, the 7 tips and tricks that we went over were that you want to use a good resource allocation tool. Just using a plain spreadsheet or something may work while you're a very small organization, but at a certain point, you're going to outgrow it. If you have a good resource allocation tool, then you're going to be able to draw a lot of data from it and be able to make the right choices. Again, the background of this was, like I mentioned, was your 3% is equal to 100% rule, which what basically says is that a small resource allocation choices are really going to have a significant impact on your bottom line. The other tips and tricks that we went into were how to use a skill matrix, how to keep it updated around the topic of crowdsourcing and all that people should be able to log resource issues. So as they see something, they should be able to just track it, saying that, hey, there's a possible issue with the resourcing, whether it's an opening, an opportunity, or it's something else. That people should then be able to create the resource plan, that the tool should then calculate the gaps, and then the resource management team should be able to look at the resource issues and gaps together, because sometimes what's the customer's stated gap is not really going to match up with the actual resource issue, because on paper they might have said they need 3 more people, but what somebody has heard is that they actually don't really need those 3 more people. They possibly have opening of 1. So when you want to look at these issues holistically in one picture, you're always going to be able to make better choices. And the 2 other tips and tricks that we went around, that we talked about, were around the topics of goals and the culture of positive feedback and reinforcement. So those are all the 7 tips and tricks that I did want to talk about. I'll quickly summarize, the entire thing. I think we talked about the 3% is equal to 100% rule. We know that well. People in the professional service organizations really, live and die by the rule, so they know how exactly that thing works. So we just talked about a solution that delivers value. We talked about all different things, and of course, it's nowadays, like we know, it's a secure hosted application. Nowadays, it's pretty common that your application have the full API with it, so you're essentially able to connect the other things with it. We gave example of 2 different solutions that we did talk about, the Salesforce and Jira, but those are merely examples. Any kind of a resource management tool is going to integrate with the other systems in your ecosystem, and those are good 2 examples with which you, for example, will integrate typically out of box. And of course, nowadays every application has mobile applications, so you can use them from your cell phone. At this point, I'm going to turn it over back to Cindy and Andrew. So Cindy, if we have questions, we can go through them now, and I think we have left at least about 15-20 minutes for the questions as well, so we can go through them.
Yes, we did. Thank you so much, Amrinder and Andrew, for this relevant information regarding effective resource management. We do have one question right now. If the rest of the attendees have anything else that they would like to ask, please continue to type your questions in there. And as one is answered, we will move on to the next one. We do have a question from Raul from class K-12. He says, we are looking to scale up our mobile workforce and have some sector-specific requirements. Can we get a custom demo to see if your product fits our requirements?
Sure. So let me address Raul from class K-12. Essentially, this topic of the mobile resource management, that's a great question. Mobile resource management, I think, just for people who are a little bit less familiar with that topic, what mobile resource management is a version of resource management where your people are on the move, right? So the people are going different places, and they need to be at that spot to be able to do a certain thing. They cannot just be remote. Many times, we all have people, the projects are at a certain location. For example, they need to go at a customer location, but those are still static locations, right? So you establish that you need 3 people in Washington, D.C., or you need 4 people in San Francisco, you need 6 people in Tokyo. But here what we're talking about is really the mobile resource management. People just need to go on an ad hoc basis. So this is sort of an area of specialty for us. We deployed multiple solutions in this area. There's actually a case study as well. I think if I remember, otherwise I try to dig it out and we can send it. Cindy, if you want to just capture the contact information, we can try to send it out to them. There's a case study on our website. But yes, we can definitely, I think the short answer is we can discuss a little further what is the exact requirement and how we build out a custom demo. But mobile resource management is a pretty, good area which usually requires its own good solution. So we can discuss a little further. And the case study that I pointed out, that could help. And those are multiple customers that we currently work with who use a solution where essentially the solution depends upon where the resource is. So as the resource does it through their iOS app, through their Android app, they mentioned, okay, I just finished this work here. So the system knows the person is at that location right now. If the person is going to get to that location, this is the time that they will need to get to that location, etc. So we can perhaps discuss a little more.
Okay. Thank you, Amrinder. We do have another question from Knighton. Who is normally responsible to manage product resource mapping in a software company?
I'll take this one. So this is Andrew Gelina from Syrinx. So we've, are a software development company ourselves and work on site and alongside the teams of several other software development companies, our customers. We see about, let's call it a 60-40 split, where normally like a VP of engineering or CTO or vice president of technology is kind of owning the resource mapping, and the other, say 40%, they kind of push that down to the project or product managers within the company, so they're kind of managing it more on a micro scale. Hope that helps, Nitin.
Thank you, Andrew.
I just wanted to add one thing. I mean, I was actually going to ask both you and both Cindy and Andrew to answer it, because I think this question really is from a customer perspective. So Andrew just did. I think Cindy, I'm sure you have a perspective as well on how Compass does, uses this thing. So I'm pretty sure if you want to add something, I know you're the moderator, but please feel free to add your own thoughts as well. And by the way, I echo what Andrew said. This is what we generally hear from our customers, but of course there's a strong customer perspective in this question.
That's true. I mean, and within the company, I think there are various hands that do, have control of that are responsible for this. I mean, we at Compass Languages, there's different buckets that we pull from. So with us, it's a collective effort, but we do work alongside, the software developer and go back and forth. So it's good to have one point person in a company, but you are definitely pulling from different areas within your company as you are building and massaging this software so that it works the way you need it to work.
Great. Yeah, so exactly. So I think we see that this thing is, you know, there are a variety of people who can play that role, and that's exactly, I agree with. I mean, of course, Cindy and Andrew, you guys know exactly because you know how this part really works out.
Do we have any other questions out there?
Folks, if you weren't able to tell in the GoToWebinar control panel that was part of the software that you used in order to access the webinar, if you look kind of down the bottom of it, there will be a question or chat tab there, and that's where you can type your questions in if you have any now. If you're feeling shy or you're pressed for time, our contact info is also on this slide here, and you can also mail the folks that invited you to the webinar. We will have this webinar available, including the Q&A, along as a recording and as a PDF as well.
We do have another question from Maria. She said she would like to know about how granular the skill matrix can be and how to forecast gaps.
Sorry, I missed that question, Cindy. Okay, let me read it as well. Okay, so I guess the first question is around how granular the skill matrix. So I think, so let me just talk about what the skill matrix in general can be. I mean, the granularity is really defined by you, Maria, so I think it really depends upon how it is that you want to do it. I think if I, you know, in the slides, for example, I went through, I talked about how, for example, the slides were, I can't remember, but I think they were being captured on a 1 to 10 scale. But really, the assessment template rests with you. There are some global templates that the system comes with, you know, like 1 to 10, the grading template A, B, C, D, E, F. But, you know, it's really up to you. You can customize it to say that, hey, we don't do it that way. We have a custom 1 to 17 skill level, which is fine. Whatever skill level, however you want to establish it, that's your prerogative. And after that, how it works is that as people give each other feedback, or as people give each other sort of assessments, they will then use that particular template. Now, you don't even have to use one global template within the entire organization. You could have different templates being used by departments, or even at an individual skill level, that this particular skill is more just binary. You either have it or you don't, and this particular skill really goes from 0 to 100. You know, so it depends on you, but then what it does is that the assessments are then driving the final value out of it. And you have some control on how the assessments formula is working as well, which you can go through in the setup. I believe you go in the setup and then you click on skill formation or something, skill management, then you can control how exactly those assessments are then reflecting in your final. And I'm sorry, there was another question, but I've lost. What was the other question, Cindy, if you could repeat?
It says how to forecast gaps. Maria asked that one also.
Oh, okay, so forecast gaps. So I believe that what the question refers to here is that when you, so essentially when you have a resource plan, well, first of all, a gap is just a difference between a resource plan and the allocation. But of course, these things can be in future also. All the projects are typically set up with what we call probabilistic forecasting. So what that means is that when you set up a resource plan, you can give a probability variable to that also, that I need 3 people, but I need it with 90% probability. So then the system will really calculate as 2.7. You know, you can't really have 2.7 people unless you put somebody at 70%, but still that's how the system will calculate it. So when you are pulling this data from your CRM, such as your Salesforce, the system will use that particular, you know, that particular probability that you have established. And this is one of the things actually we find with the Salesforce integration. Sometimes we need to figure out where exactly are you storing that, because of course each Salesforce implementation is different. But essentially it's coming from there, and that's how you're forecasting it. But this is a pretty significant part of it. I mean, there are some customers with whom we spend multiple months on their forecasting only. But what's out of box works pretty well. But if, for example, you have, you know, the work involves a lot more forecasting, that can then be done as entirely custom. But what's out of box will generally work for a large number of PSOs. If you know, but again, if your work units are very, very, very small, then it's possible that you may just need a little bit more, you know, extra work in being able to forecast it, because your work units are just sort of tiny.
Okay, we have a two-part question from Sonika regarding the skill matrix. Who should be controlling the skill matrix and managing it? And then, should that be used exclusively for resource allocation or for training?
So, sorry, Andrew, do you want me to take that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead and take a stab at it. I mean, essentially, the first part of the question being who should be able to control it, that really just depends upon how you want to set up your organization. That's essentially is part of your user group security mechanism. Again, you go through your setup menu, you'll see something like the user groups, and then you can then set up whoever you want to give it to the access to it, right? Whoever is in the right user groups who can access skill matrix, you can put people in that user group that you want to be able to access. So that sort of is a question that I'll sort of punt on, because that is a your own context question, because you want to see who want to be able to access it. But many times what we see a default way is that people are able to, all of them are able to access it. Many people are able to access it. Many people cannot make changes to it, right? So you have a much broader view population, which could be everybody, and a very narrow edit population, which is common. Now, whether it should be used for resource allocation, it should be used for training. It's used for both, because when you're allocating it, if the person is asked that they really need somebody who knows how to handle this particular skill level, you need to have somebody in that skill level. Even if, for example, if you don't have somebody with exactly with that skill level, at least you want to have somebody who has that particular skill, but maybe a level lesser, right? So they said they need an expert. They need a absolutely top of the line expert for this particular technology, and you have somebody who's pretty advanced. Maybe he's not top of the line expert, but he's pretty good, or she's pretty good. Then you can then still say that, well, this is the gap we have. So it's definitely used as part of your resource allocation. And of course, then training. That training is how you get your people to be able to advance their skills. So when you go to a specific skill, if you're logged in yourself, you go to your skill matrix, your own. Then it'll tell you that if you want to get to the next one, these are the training options that are out there that other people have used who have the next level of skill. And that's where it connects with the global training marketplace as well. So if you don't identify a training yourself, you can still use the global training marketplace to see which are the other people, which are the trainings that are offered by people in this area, in this, for this specific skill. So even if you've never entered a skill, you can still see some skill from the global training marketplace, which can help people advance their skills.
I think one thing I want to add is that if you do use it and make it performance related, that if you kind of tie people's, bonuses or advancement or et cetera to the matrix here, then you might not get quite as honest of an answer out of folks, or if there's a punitive element to it. So you definitely want to make it kind of a positive, here's what I'm able to put out there for what I'm able to do, and here's what I'm able to contribute to the company, and probably don't want to try to tie it to performance things as well.
Okay,
I agree with that. I mean, Andrew, sorry, Cindy, but I agree with what I think Andrew is saying is it's spot on. We usually find that skill matrix, you want to keep it positive, help people get to the next level, but not try to use that to say because you don't have this skill, we're not going to give you the right bonus. So I agree with that 100%.
Great. We do have another question again from Maria. Does the system alert users of upcoming needed skills so people can train towards that, so they can increase their allocability?
So the system will alert people for the allocations, right? So the system will allocate people for when your allocation, the current allocation, is going to end. The system will alert people when the next allocation is going to start. So the system will send out notification to a lot of people, and those are configurable as well, but this is, I'm referring to how it's set out of box. We'll send out notifications to people regarding allocations. It will send out alerts related to skill levels when they change, right? Saying that it'll say that, hey, you were at this skill level based on the data that we've collected over time. Now we think that this is at the skill level. You have if you want, then you can update it. But the question I think really goes into whether it'll tell if you have the skill, you'll be better able to allocation. That perhaps is a little bit of a harder question. The system will not try to tell somebody that, hey, you go ahead and get the skill, but what it will tell is, so perhaps a little bit more, one step removed answer is that it will tell people that, hey, your current allocation is going to end in the month and at the end of May, and these are the other allocations that are not fulfilled, regarding and related to all aspects of it, where that person is needed and what level of skill is needed. And then it's a little bit up to the person or to their people manager to say that, hey, your allocation is going to end in the April or May, and then for the next allocation to begin, you need to have this skill. So do you want to go ahead and take advantage of this training right now, so that you can be ready for the next deployment? So you may have to connect a couple of points, Maria, to be able to get to that specific point where you're trying to go. Andrew, I think you may find some similar things. I mean, you, as your own organization's allocations, you may find a similar, a similar balance there, right?
Yeah, a lot of what we see at Skill Gap is more client-driven. So, for example, these days, a lot of our clients are using JavaScript frameworks in order to build these really nice interactive front ends that are responsive and work both in a web browser and a mobile phone and so forth, and like Angular, JS, and React. And so what we see is from our sales folks, we'll get an idea of what kind of the marketplace demand is, and then we'll feed that back in and say, okay, so what can we do to get our folks who maybe already used a JavaScript framework like Ember or another one up to speed on these new technologies, and try to get them trained up ahead of kind of the burst of customer demand that we see. React being one of the favorite ones now. Everyone's seeing it was invented by Facebook, allows you to do some nice, really interactive and live updating applications using the framework.
That's right, and I think just one thing I did very relevant to, I think, Andrew, what you just said, we see a lot of uptick in the global training marketplace resources for React, React specifically. So if you logged into the system and you go to the React skill in your, in your skill matrix, what you'll find at the bottom of that is, first of all, if you have created any specific training, as part of you'll obviously see them first. But even if you never created a training for React, the system will still tell you that there are these 6, I believe there were 6 of them when I checked a couple of days ago, 6 trainings available through the global training marketplace for React. Now, you may have to check whether they're going to meet your location and the dates, etc. But there were 6 of them that were available. So we see a lot of uptick in React specific. But exactly, I think when there's in the skill, when you see a demand from the customer, then that's how the system's slowly able to pick that up, saying that this particular thing is needed, and then the trainings can come in, and that's how probably this entire thing. So that's probably the long answer to your question, Maria, but I think that's typically how it works.
So I have a question for some of the attendees. Folks, if you have any technologies that you are kind of in demand at your company, or that you find yourself having to train towards, specifically around software, we'd be curious to hear what your experience is in the marketplace. So if you want to go in the question window and instead of a question, type an answer, more like, yeah, we're also seeing demand for React or other JavaScript frameworks or Node.js or SQL Server, DBAs, let us know. We'd be curious to see what your experience is.
Right, and I think we are pretty much coming to an end. Cindy, is there any other question? While I think some people may be typing based on Andrew's prompt, but do we have any pending that we need to answer in the meantime?
We do not have any pending right now, so if you have something that you'd like to ask before we wrap everything up, please type that in quickly. Or if you're responding to what Andrew had said, go ahead and get that in and we will address it. So we do just have a couple more minutes to finish up. So please, if you have something that you would, like to hear more about, a more in-depth answer, please go ahead and send that question in.
Great, and the contact information stays on. Andrew's email address is on, my email address is on. Of course, a lot of people nowadays decide to interact via Twitter by asking a question on Twitter. So we do that as well. If you would like to ask a question on Twitter, a public question via Twitter, that's fine too. Please go ahead and ask it that way as well. And Cindy, I did, and Andrew, sorry, did we already mention the slides will be, the PDF will be sent out and the recording? Sorry, if you could just remind it before we wrap up.
Yes, I was going to do that. It doesn't look like we do have any more questions, so at this time, as Amrinder just said, you will be receiving the PDF version of today's presentation with the recording, and we would definitely like to thank, again, Andrew Jelina with Syrinx Consulting Corporation and Amrinder, who is the CTO of Bizmerlin, and for their knowledge and being able to share that with us today. And we thank all of the attendees for signing up, and we hope that this was very informative for you. And again, the contact information is there, so if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Andrew or to Amrinder, and I know that they would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
All right, thank you very much, folks.
We'll
see you on the next one.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Cindy. Bye, all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.